We have a solid core of about 15 to 18 members, and it would do no justice if I don't mention them. So, Mary Pat House, Errol Murillo, Elise Block, Chris Faltasak, who's in Scandinavia right now, Tom and Kathy Oss, Shar Molly, Susan Metcalf, Trish Foreman, Tanya Kite, Mary Boland, Joe Globitz, Linda Bjorklund, Tom Blank, Tracy Frannick, Tim Paul, and me, Dallas Eggers. Okay, we're always looking for new members. I think I found a member who's 140 the other day. Like a breath of fresh air. We'll see. A special note tonight is that we have a book signing on the 18th. Chuck Sunby, some of you know him. He is a Prescott historian. He's 86 years old. He started writing his book in 1967. It was printed about a month ago. And in his book is Prescott history that is not known anywhere but in this book. Actually, one of his books is going in the Wisconsin State Archives because of the history in it. So he will be here on the 18th from 1 till 3. He'll have a book signing. He's going to have a short presentation. We have some treasures that day that no one has ever heard. They are recordings from someone born in 1903, which we will be playing, telling the stories of Prescott. So on the 18th, if you want to come in, we'll be here. Chuck will sign his book, and you'll have to suffer through me again a little bit. But 1 to 3 on the 18th is Chuck Sunby's book signing for Charles Henry Staff and the Prescott Spinner Company story, which is 2 buildings over. And remember, we depend upon your donations. At the end of today's shows, please consider donating. We have books for sale up there, and right now, it's my pleasure to, I guess he's turned into a friend of mine. This is Robert Taunt. He is from La Crosse. As he said, this is the 3rd appearance here, and I always find him fascinating. So I hope you enjoy the night, and thank you all for coming.
We have a fascinating history on the upper Mississippi River. Everybody thinks about Mark Twain and the lower river. We've got just as many, if not more, stories up here. And tonight we're going to look at 2 things. Dallas is talking about stories never told. You're going to hear a newspaper account that probably hasn't been read since 1858. And we're going to look at a picture that hasn't been seen since 1870. So, let's talk about the War Eagle and the Galena, 2 steamboats. The War Eagle is forever a piece of our local history and legend. The War Eagle and the Galena were frequent visitors to the Prescott levee and also went up to Stillwater and Hudson. Well, there's many Eagles. There's one built in 1845. We're going to be talking about the one built in 1854. Come on, have a seat. There was one built in 1858, 1876, 1899, so it gets a little confusing sometimes, and that's why we have a book to straighten that all out. But there was only one Galena that we know of. So in the steamboat trade, these are Western River steamboats. The steamboats on the Hudson River in New York had deep hulls, and the engine works were in the hull. A Western River steamboat, whether they be side wheelers or stern wheelers, have a very shallow hull because of our shallow river. Decked over, and the machinery is on top of that hull. So it sits on top of the main deck. That defines a Western River steamboat. So the pair of steamboats was built. These were days, 1853, 54, when they did not have blueprints. We can't quite imagine that anymore, but they did the old cut and fit method. And they had expert carpenters that knew the curve of the boat needs to go this way, and so forth. And they would cut and fit. No blueprints. And so it's a little hard to describe these boats without blueprints. But the newspaper accounts came out in 1854. The War Eagle was built in Fulton, Ohio, the Galena in Madison, Indiana. They're both down by Cincinnati, big boat building area. 224 feet in length, 4 boilers, 19-inch cylinders. That's a substantial. Side wheelers, fast boats. Cost about $33,000. Anybody have a pickup truck in the parking lot? And on the War Eagle's pilot house, a golden eagle. Now, frustratingly, we have no photograph of the Galena, but we can use the photograph of the War Eagle because the newspaper said she's so exact a pattern of the War Eagle that a full description after what has been said about the War Eagle is unnecessary. They said you couldn't tell them apart except for the name on the side of the boat. So that's good news for us. I have looked and looked and looked, and when I was down in Galena, Illinois, giving a talk, I found this picture. Well, it's not a picture. It's from one of those bird's eye view maps of Galena. And by gosh, there's the boat Galena. The map was drawn in 1854, 55, and they captured the Galena. This is the only picture that we have found anywhere of the boat. The Galena had a number of captains: Morehouse, Blakely, Lodwick, Lawton, and we'll talk more about the War Eagle in just a minute. They were built for safety, speed, and comfort, said the Minnesota Packet Company. And this is a general layout of one of the boats. There was a stove in the rear and a stove in the fore part of the boat to keep you warm in the spring and fall. The ladies' cabins were in the aft part and the gentlemen's cabins in the forward part. The ladies would be back there with a library, maybe a piano. There was a pantry, which you could get a tour of, wash rooms and a barber shop, post office on most boats. And the gentlemen's cabins were forward above the boilers. And so if there was a bar on the boat, it was in the forward part for the comfort of the gentlemen. Keep their minds off of the boilers. The cabins were luxurious by those standards. I look at this and I notice right off, this must be a later picture of the War Eagle. And you notice the carpet is pieced together. The carpet doesn't match. They have replaced it due to water damage or something. But it was as comfortable as they could make in those days. 46 staterooms, 96 guests. Remember that in the first class passage, there were about 100 people could be accommodated. Remember 100. This is the grand saloon in the middle of the boat for dining and dances. And after dinner, a heavy curtain was drawn across, and the ladies' cabins were separated from the gentlemen's, and there would be no fraternization after dark. No hanky-panky. And of course, everything was lighted with kerosene lamps. They were built for the rapids. There were rapids in the Mississippi. It doesn't circulate with us today. The upper rapids were at Rock Island, lower rapids at Keokuk. At Keokuk, the rapids ran for 11 miles. And they had to bring the boats through. The newspaper said Captain Harris came over the lower rapids with only 30 inches of water in the most shallow places. So there were deeper places, but he had to get over those shallow parts. That's not much water to float a boat on. These were large boats, 200 and some feet long. 30 inches of water, you could get through without getting your shirt tails wet. And the War Eagle's draft was 24 inches light and 5 foot fully loaded. So we're dealing with maybe 6 inches to get over the rapids. So here's the first captain of the War Eagle, Daniel Smith Harris. He was captain and owner in 1854, and very notable steamboat guy. He and his brother Scribe built the first steamboat on the Galena River in 1829, very early. And by 1854, he had carried over 1 million passengers. So he was very active in the trade. And he was a gentleman, but he was a tiger too. When La Crosse requested service from the steamboats, they were building up a business community and farming community, and they wanted a regular stop from Harris's boats. And he said, "No boat. I will not give you a boat, and if you try to put one on in competition with me, I'll run you off." They were offering him money to stop there. There were more stops, more towns than they had boats for. They simply couldn't accommodate it. They couldn't build steamboats fast enough for the demand. Winona also tried to compete with Harris. They bought a boat called the Tishomingo, and it was a fast boat, and it did very well. I think actually beat the War Eagle in a race sometime. But Captain Harris undercut the rates and undercut until he drove the Tishomingo out of business. He later said he incurred a $7,000 loss just to drive the other boat out of business, which he did in 1 year, 1 season. So he was a tiger, tough guy to deal with. And yet, he was appreciated for being a gentleman. Down at the Galena levee, and this is the Galena levee here, there was a lady with 5 children, and she's weeping on the levee. Her husband died of cholera, and she can't get to St. Paul. Captain gave her free passage. They took care of the kids, fed them, took care of them well. And when the boat had pulled out, he took up a collection for her, and they raised $25.60. And so they go, $25.60, what is that? The average monthly pay in Illinois in 1850 was $12.55. So he raised more than 2 months' pay for her to survive on, and took her to St. Paul. The newspaper said, "Long live the War Eagle and Captain Harris." He was appreciated. Another story in the newspaper. Importantly, this isn't Harris bragging about himself. This is the newspaper and other people who saw these things telling the story. The Chicago and Galena Railroad came up in 1852 to Galena. The station is still there. That was built in 1857. And a gentleman and his wife came up to the captain and said, "Captain, my wife is bone weary from traveling on the train." In those days, a train ride was not pleasurable. It was clunky and dirty and so forth. And there's no staterooms left on the boat. And the captain said, "I don't like to give up my cabin, but I will do so for a lady." So he gave this couple his cabin on the boat. Pretty deluxe accommodations on the top of the boat. Well, the Grand Excursion took place in 1854. This is when the first railroad came to the Mississippi River. And the railroad company hired steamboats to take people who had made the trip on the railroad up to St. Paul. So the War Eagle was the lead boat, and the Galena was also in the group of boats that ran. They were brand new boats, and so they were wanted to be hired by the company. And on board was Millard Fillmore, the 13th President of the United States. He had just left office. Was he a Democrat or a Republican? Oh, politics. He was a Whig. He was the last Whig president of the United States. And he just left office. And as the 5 boats, 1,200 people, 100 editors of newspapers, and the newspaper said 200 women too, came up. And they made stops at Galena, La Crosse, Trempealeau, Prescott, and Fort Snelling. And One of the fellows on board complained that at each one of these stops, the president made a long, boring speech, sounded like he was campaigning again. And they had canned lobster every night. And dances, they tied the boats together. It was a fine old time. Early on in its career, October of 1854, the Warrigal was involved in a rescue of people from the steamboat Nominee. 16 miles below La Crosse, it struck a snag, a log in the river, and the passengers had to wait for the Warrigal. So the Nominee had come out a day ahead, and they knew that following them was the Warrigal the next day. So they had to wait for the boat. There was no rescue team. There was no way people from the shore could row out a little dinghy and take 200 people off. But the Warrigal left Galena with 600 passengers already. Remember, how many were they? 100. 100 in first class. Well, they had the decks full with 600, and they took 200 from the Nominee.
Wow.
Now they had 800 people on that boat, including, notably, Chippewa Chief Holden the Day and Argonaut, another lake chief, who were returning from a treaty signing. So we have documentation that 2 Indian chiefs rode as passengers, they were not captives, on the Warrigal as part of the rescue. When they got upriver to St. Paul, just outside of St. Paul, they hit the Pig's Eye Bar and got stuck because of all that weight, and they had to unload the people in the freight before they could get off. So what happened with those 200 people? Here's the old Nominee. It was a very well-known and popular boat, and it sank in 18 feet of water in about 3 minutes because the hull was very shallow, maybe 3 to 5 feet to fill with water. Well, 18 feet of water left the top of the boat above water. And so the 200 passengers huddled on top of the boat in October, all night. So it was cold, but they were rescued. In 1855, there was a spring race to St. Paul. In the wintertime, St. Paul was isolated from the rest of the country, and so the first boat through Lake Pepin, that would be the last part of the river to break up. The first boat through Pepin would get free dockage for the year, for the season, and it was worth maybe $500, so they really competed for that prize. Well, the Warrigal was first through the ice in April 17th, which we might think about that today. I don't think there was any ice around in April. But the Corps of Engineers still records every year the first boat that makes it through the ice. So now, again, there were 267 in the cabin space. How many were they supposed to hold? 100. So what did they do? They filled the rooms. There was a lower bunk and an upper bunk. You could maybe squeeze 2 people on each. And they would also throw mattresses in that center saloon area. And people would pay first class passage and sleep on the floor on these mattresses. And then the rest of the immigrants and lower paid positions would huddle on the deck below. So in April 17th, the Warrigal came through with 635 people again. She was back on May 1st with 500 passengers, May 5th with 300, May 12th with 500. These are tremendous numbers of people coming into the Minnesota Territory. There's big boom to settle the land and so forth. And the Galena brought 600 in about that time. And the newspaper said, including 54 babies. And they presumed that the gentlemen were crammed in the front part of the boat away, as far away from the babies as they could get. But you know, in those days, you couldn't tell the captain how many people he could put on his boat. That's up to the captain. It's his boat. It's his business, right? I mean, something like that. What's the worst thing that could happen? Maybe fire. Well, May 12th, 1855, the War Eagle was discovered to be on fire. But it was a small fire, and they put it out, and there was no serious damage. As we're going to go through this, it's unbelievable that people in this time period had no sense of fire safety like we do today. And probably that's why we do today. So the profit for 1855 was substantial. This is why the boats were running. This is why they kept building them, even though they would sink or burn or whatever. Harris's last trip for the season, he was supposed to come to Hastings, or he was supposed to go to St. Paul, but he only got to Hastings. And he said to the company, "You let me charge whatever I can get, and I'll make lots of money." When he got back, he made $9,700 on one trip, and he was mad. He wanted to make $10,000. But the War Eagle made $44,000 in an 8-month season for 1855. Remember, the boat only cost $33,000. And the Minnesota Packet Company made $200,000 in 1855. That would be in the millions today. Harris built a little house in Galena, 7,000 square feet, 3 floors, 9 bedrooms, 7 baths, fireplaces, parlors, and a billiard room. Wouldn't you like to see that today? You can. It's a bed and breakfast in Galena. And when I was down there, I had the opportunity to stay in the house, and it's just an amazing thing, furnished pretty much the way it was a long time ago. Well, in 1857, we pick up the diary of Stephen Hanks. And it's rare that we have such a good, complete diary. He was a pilot on the Galena, and so he leaves us with a lot of stories about the Galena and the War Eagle. In the spring of 1857, he towed 2 other steamboats with the Galena from LeClaire, Iowa back to Galena. And I can imagine towing one, but towing 2 boats. Now, since it's a side wheeler, the stern is open for a hawser to tie to the other boats. And they took the paddles that were in the water off of the other 2 boats so there would be no drag. But they towed 2 boats. How would you stop the boats in the back? And during the trip, there was 6 to 8 inches of snow that fell on the boats, and they had to shovel it off. He recalls racing the War Eagle to St. Paul in 1857. He was in the pilot house, and the captain said, just push him to shore. And he said, "No, I'm going to win this fair and square." He said, "I can read the water." And there was a sandbar. He knew that the deep water was off the port side. And so he steered for that. The War Eagle went the other way and got a little stuck. And so as they got near St. Paul, they were very close, neck and neck, running along. And all of a sudden, one of the deckhands, Tom Murphy, woke up out of his sleep, maybe drunken sleep, and fell overboard. And so the War Eagle had to stop, put the yawl down, and they searched for him. And so the War Eagle was 18 minutes behind the Galena. 18 minutes. They searched for this guy for 18 minutes. Okay, that's enough, let's go. And they never did find him. So. Well, in 1868, or 1857, there were 1,569 landings in La Crosse by 102 boats. This is Mississippi landings. Winona had 1,300, St. Paul 701. That seems to be the record because in 1857, there was a little problem with the railroads. Everybody wanted to build a railroad. And if you give me $100, I'll chip you in on my latest railroad. I didn't have any track or cars yet, but that'll come. And so you'll all give me $100 and we'll build this railroad. They were called paper railroads. And when one venture collapsed and an insurance company collapsed and then banks collapsed, and it was the Panic of 1857, which interestingly enough was the first recession, first depression in the United States, which spread worldwide. Railroad problems. And so the steamboat trade never came back after that. 1857 we went into the Civil War, and it wasn't until the end of the Civil War that the economy really came back. And so the steamboat trade peaked in 1857, which seems very early. Well, then we come to the Galena's end, appropriate for today in July. By the way, steamboat guys considered 6 letters in the name of a boat to be unlucky, as in 666. 6 is an incomplete number. The world was made in 7 days. But that was the name of the town. Usually they would avoid that by calling it the city of Galena. But the name on the boat was the Galena. July 1st, 1858, we have a wonderful account. This is an account that I found recently that I think hasn't been read since 1858. Dr. Orpheus Everts was on board. This is his picture in the Civil War, so this is like 3 years later. So that's pretty much what it looked like in 1858. As a doctor, he was articulate, learned man. He wrote an account of the whole thing, and we'll talk some more about that. But he said the weather was excessively warm and the boat was hot enough to ignite by the slightest agitating cause. Today we can kind of appreciate that, right? Before I retired, the chimneys appeared like volcanoes, emitting showers of sparks, a pyrotechnic of the first water. Oh my God. Fire safety? They did have buckets of water at various places. The boat arrived at Red Wing about 1 a.m. on July 1st. They were trying to make up time, so they were running hot. And I was just there coming up tonight. I stopped there and looked at the site. And so this is his personal account. I want to read this through with you. My impression is that the fire was communicated from the lower portion of the chimney to the surrounding woodwork. That's what happened. There was a small room, like a closet, on either side where the chimney went through, so nobody could touch it. And since it was like a closet, frequently the steamboat crew would stuff straw tick mattresses in there, to get them out of the way. That was not the cause of the fire in this case, but they did have water jackets to insulate the pipe where it went through the deck, and if those went dry, of course, maybe that's what happened. So imagine this, the fire is on the roof, and the flames are coming down the roof of the staterooms. Someone caught my foot and shouted, "The boat's on fire!" The red flame pierced through the cabin like the tongue of a demon. People were frantic. Where shall I go? Save me, save me. Captain Lawton appeared like an apparition in the midst of us and firmly said, "This way you will all be saved. Steady, this way." And Everett said, "A braver man never trod a deck, nor a more humane man." So among the notable incidents of the scene, the pilot up in the pilot house, Tom Drenning, stayed at the wheel. I can only imagine that he was trying to keep the boat against the shore by running it. Because if it had drifted out into the river, more people would have drowned. But he stayed at the wheel as the flames are rising up around the pilot house, and at the last minute, he jumps out, slides down the rigging, and jumps overboard. So this is a description that we find nowhere else. And this is somebody who has just gotten off the boat and is standing there and very articulately describes what's happening to the boat that he rode on. Down falls the deck, up shots the flames, renewed with strength, vaulting high above the black chimneys. They're 60 feet tall. The flames are going up 60 feet. And then, crash come the chimneys down on the deck. The river seethes and hisses. The wheelhouse arches flame up, tumble into the surge. Bang goes a cylinder head. The boilers fall into the hull. The flames begin to droop. The hull is burning low. The water's edge is reached, and she sinks, and the flames expire, and all is dark and silent. It's the only description that we've found of somebody watching the boat like that. So that's the loss of the Galena, July 1st. There were 80 people on board. 5 people lost their lives trying to save a cow, basically, and drowning. Notably, this was the first fire north of Galena on the Mississippi. Although there were others that followed. Pilot Hanks brought her in, and Tom Drenning was the second pilot. And Hanks prevented Captain Lawton from running back in before the cabin collapsed on everything. But they did get most of the people out. And she served a short life of 4 years, and this was remembered in 1870. And we'll come back to that. And because this is the beginning of legend on the river. The Chicago newspaper didn't mince their words. Here you can see where the chimney comes through the deck. There is in fact nothing so flammable as a river steamboat, and considering the extremely tinderbox character of the upper cabins, it is a wonder they do not burn oftener. Fire becomes the perpetual terror of captains, and so forcibly impressed upon their minds that the smell from burning pine wood will awaken them out of sound sleep, while blowing whistles, ringing bells will not disturb them. So they're not burning pine in the boilers, they're burning oak. But if you smell pine burning, try to imagine the difference between the two. The hull of the boats was heavy, 2-inch thick oak timber. But the upper works had to be light, so it was made of light rosiny pine, painted with oil paint, covered with tar paper, and the decks were treated with linseed oil. And people smoked all over the place.
Wow.
Fire was the leading cause of destruction of the boats. Well, Galena's gone back to the War Eagle in 1860. She was in a tornado down in Louisiana, Missouri. And the newspapers are so frustrating. It said the War Eagle was hit by a tornado in Louisiana. Because we all know where Louisiana is. It's in Missouri. Well, there it is. It's about halfway between Keokuk and St. Louis. The chimneys were blown off the boat. The cabin was twisted and laying on shore. Somehow they bolted the cabin up and put it back in place. And the only injuries, that Captain Davis's shoulder was dislocated and Porter was injured. But nobody was killed, fortunately, due to the valiant actions of the crew getting them to the back of the boat and down. But there was $5,000 damage to a boat, $33,000, and it's had some wear on it. And we know this because it was insured by Quaker City Insurance, the best insurance company there is at the time. They towed it to St. Louis, and it was repaired and working again July 27th, less than 2 months. You go, how do they? No heating, ventilating, air conditioning, no plumbing, no electrical. It's just a wood box. So the record of the War Eagle has also been confused. There was a War Eagle that was down on the Tennessee River, was shot through the pilot house and the chimneys by rebel forces, used as a hospital boat. That was not our boat here. That was the one built in 1858. And it was basically made a mess of during the war. But the War Eagle from 1854 ferried troops from St. Paul down, La Crosse down, St. Paul to Galena. They brought troops up to Fort Snelling, Dunleith, which is east of Duke, to La Crosse, and troops from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and 25 boys that became part of the Iron Brigade. It was not pressed into government service like many other boats, maybe because it was 7 years old, and some boats were needed on the upper Mississippi. So it was fortunate that it didn't get pulled into service. This is believed to be Red Wing, and the boat is jammed with dark blue suits. They're Union soldiers. And this barge alongside, if you can see, there are stacks of rifles here. So it's this is the boys going off to war. And one little naughty story, as they went downriver, they stopped at many of the towns so the boys could say farewell to family and friends and everything. And at each town, the ladies would be out waving hankies and so forth. And as they went by one town in Minnesota, one of the ladies was waving her underwear. So, well, the depth of the Mississippi is fickle. And in the 1860s, the newspaper actually believed that the Mississippi was going to dry up, totally dry, and never run again. And they talked about climate change. And it was due to those darn farmers, because the farmers are plowing up the ground and the loggers are cutting the trees and the water is going into the ground instead of running into the river. That's what they thought. Today, we have a 9-foot channel, and probably some of you know this already. If the river stage is 3.5, that's 3.5 plus 9 foot, or it's actually 12 and a half feet deep. So minimum water, if it's 0, if the river stage is 0, minimum water is 9 feet, which would be tricky to float some of the barges that we have. In the 1860s, they were trying to get a 4-foot channel, and they were building wing dams to funnel the water into the center of the channel, which would then scour out the sand and keep it deep. Well, that would, you could still probably walk across if you didn't step in a hole. But in 1863, the water really receded down to 30 inches. Well, that's getting down there, all you can float a boat in. Wouldn't get your shirt tails wet. And in June, we're down to 18 inches of water, which is a no-go for the large boats. and he can practically dance across the Mississippi. So Hank's on the War Eagle now, he's piloting the War Eagle, talks about 18 to 20 inches of water. And of course, it's not just the water going down, whatever's in the river, the snags and so forth, are now sticking up, and you have to steer around them as well. He talks about 14 inches of water at the St. Paul Bar, which was a bad place to get over. And in this picture, we can see the whole river is blocked by a bar. In July 17th, La Crosse was described as the head of navigation for the large boats that couldn't get above La Crosse. August 11th, 1863, Prescott was said to be the head of navigation because they could get small boats up to Prescott. And then somebody said, well, the John Rumsey, another boat, can make it to St. Paul, but without any freight. So at one point, this was the head of navigation. And the pilots were reporting that they had blown the whistles to clear the cattle out of the channel. So 14 inches of water is just ridiculous. But the water did come back, and the Davidson brothers in La Crosse began buying small boats, smaller and smaller and smaller boats. And the large boats would stop at La Crosse. They'd transfer the freight to the smaller boats, 2 or 3, and up the river until they couldn't go any farther, and then even smaller and smaller. Maybe 3, 4, or 5 transfers to get freight and passengers up to here. And of course, every time you had to move the freight, that was an expense. You had to pay the crew. So it became a very expensive deal. The Davidson brothers bought these little boats, and they made it work. Nobody else could. The Davidsons wiped out the competition, and they became a monopoly, which was not good for later. The water came back in 1865, and then was better after that. This is an interesting story. Mission of Mercy in summer of 1863, Robert Hickman was a slave down in Missouri, and his family had been sold to a neighboring plantation, and he would run over there at night and come back and get beaten in the morning. And so he and others built a flatboat secretly, and on a moonless night they pushed it off and carried a bunch of these families down the Missouri River towards the Mississippi, towards the Confederacy, going downriver. But they had faith, and they said prayers and sang hymns quietly all night, and they were picked up in the morning by the War Eagle, would have been Captain Abe Mitchell, and he towed them to Fort Snelling. This sounds like an incredible story, but these were the first black people in St. Paul. They founded the Pilgrim Baptist Church in 1863, and he was ordained, Reverend Hickman was ordained and pastor until 1886. It's still an active congregation. The story comes from Reverend Hickman's son, who was little at the time, and he was interviewed in the 1930s and part of the WPA interview project. His memory may not be accurate because he was pretty small at the time. There's some geographic problems I have with this, but this is their foundation story. If you go to the church website, this is the story they tell. It was the War Eagle that picked them up. So I think we give them some credit for that. In 1866, the Northwest Union Packet Company was formed, and the War Eagle was purchased by interest at La Crosse. And it had the Eagle in here from 1854 to 1866. Maybe a good paint job would have lasted all that time, but when the La Crosse people bought it, they put white bands on the collars of the chimneys. It was called the White Collar Line. And this was recently discovered, photographed by the archives, and it appears to have been 1866. So this is at St. Paul, and the eagle is still on there. Every other picture we have with the white collars, there's no eagle on the paddle box. What it actually says is U.S. mail, you just can't see it in the picture. So the Davidson brothers were running thin on money after the Civil War. They probably couldn't afford to paint the eagle over again, and so they painted that out. But the history of the War Eagle is a history of struggle, like many of the other boats. I could go on for a long time, but they ran aground many times, in collision with a number of other boats, damaged by ice and tornadoes, and the War Eagle actually sank once at Cibola, Iowa, and it struck a log, and once it was sunk by ice up at Hudson. But it was in such shallow water that they were able to raise it in 2 or 3 days, and she was back in service. The newspaper said, well, in 1867, they put a new hull under the boat. Anybody that's a boat guy knows that's possible, but to me it seems pretty incredible. Jack the boat up and replace the entire hull. But they did that in 1867. It's getting to be an old boat. And the newspaper said, the War Eagle is one of the oldest packets on the river. She was built 12 years ago. No, actually it was 14 years ago. And has been a great favorite in her day. The War Eagle was the Delta Queen of the 1860s. Everybody knew the War Eagle, and if you wanted to have a good ride, you wanted to go on the War Eagle. And it was stopped here many times. So we want to remember a great history of the old boat. Well, down at the La Crosse waterfront, the steamboat dock was down at the main part of the city, and that's where the fire department is. But the railroad dock, the steamboat dock at the railroad terminal, was north of the city and separated by the rivers. So there had to be a depot bridge, and that was built in 1859 after the railroad got there. There was a speed limit on the bridge, no faster than a walk for carriages, and you got a $6 ticket if you went faster, and there were many tickets given out. So here's the 2 branches of the La Crosse River. The one was closed later. There's only 1 branch now. The end of the bridge, here was a little boarding house, grain elevator, the railroad depot, and the steamboat dock. And the boat was wintered at La Crosse, and in 1870 she started out leaving La Crosse for St. Paul, and then she began her regular run from Dubuque to St. Paul with stops in between. So it was down at Dubuque Friday, May 13th. The War Eagle leaves Dubuque. Saturday it arrives at La Crosse in the afternoon, waiting for the midnight train from Milwaukee. About 12:15, the midnight train arrives. It was late, obviously. And at the last minute, they loaded some freight, Danforth's non-explosive petroleum fluid. They said, while it was not explosive, it was very, very flammable. And what they didn't understand what it was. This was a new type of material to burn in the kerosene lamps. They actually had a different lamp, and it sounds like Coleman fuel, which is white gas in wooden barrels. And 3 of the barrels are leaking. So they loaded them on board regardless, and It was reported to the captain. The captain ordered the carpenter to fix it. After midnight, he arrives with his lantern. This is one of the lanterns that was recovered from the War Eagle site. And the carpenter said he held the lantern near the barrel of gasoline with a leak. Now, does that sound like a good idea? The carpenter attributes the fire to the ignition of the gas fumes arising from the cask to the light of the lantern, which was exploded. The bottom of these lanterns unscrews and comes out to light them. So if it was partially unscrewed and dropped or something, and the fire demon is loose. So roll it off into the river, right? Except that it wedged between the barge that was alongside the War Eagle and almost a comedy of errors. And there it sticks. Now they have a petroleum fire with only water to put it out. It doesn't work. So the resulting conflagration, petroleum smoke makes thick black smoke, very choky smoke. It spread to the wharf barges, the freight ships, the train from Milwaukee, the railroad depot, and the grain elevator. And of course, grain burns very hot. And all within an hour's time, things were destroyed. And the paper said the heat was of terrible intensity. Flames lit up the surrounding country for miles with all the brilliancy of day. So the passengers that were towards the bow ran down the stairs in the front of the boat. It was the only main entryway to the passenger compartment. But there were at least one stairway in the aft. And the people that were awakened, it's after midnight now, some people went to bed. People who were awakened at the direction of Captain Cushing escaped by the aft part of the boat, jumping overboard. Some were picked up by the yawl and so forth. Many were compelled to jump overboard, including the pilot, Jim Martin. He was up on the hurricane deck here. He jumped overboard. I figure that's about 25-foot jump, a high dive. And there's an explosion. This would make a great movie. Some said it was a can of gunpowder in a locker amidships. People kept their distance. And there was rumored to be 48 kegs of gunpowder under the bow. But the boat burned to the waterline and sank before that went off. A similar thing happened with the Galena. There was rumored to be gunpowder on board, and so everybody backed away. The picture then presented the roaring conflagration, the terror, the alarm, the uncertainty, the exaggerated rumors of loss of life, the eager crowds of people shifting here and there, their faces lit up by the flames, firemen bravely at work, all formed a scene to appall the timid and awe the brave. So casualties, there were 10 cabin passengers that were going through, and some immigrants on the deck and about 30 from the train. But the fire chief's report, which we found in his beautiful handwriting, lists only 5 casualties. Mary Ulrich, a young socialite, very popular, drowned. Felix Spiller was the barber of the boat. He was asked by Mary Ulrich's uncle to watch her and make sure she got off at the right stop. Probably gave him a tip. In those days, a haircut and a shave was 25 cents. So maybe he got 25 cents. Mary couldn't swim. They made it to the aft part of the boat. They jumped in the water. Felix tried to save her, but they both drowned. I couldn't understand that. They were 20 feet from the shore. But below the War Eagle were a number of barges tied up. The current carried them under the barges, and they had no oxygen. So they were found the next day together. He tried to save her and couldn't. An elderly lady, name unknown, probably an immigrant, drowned. A deck sweep drowned. And Sanford McBrayer was an interesting fellow, a Kentucky bank president, up for a hunting and fishing trip. He had just passed his 65th birthday 3 days before. And he was a heavy gentleman, never came out of his stateroom, and they never found his body, although they looked hard and long in the wreck for it. The property damage was substantial for that period of time. War Eagle valued at $30,000, which is a stretch, but it wasn't insured at all for anything. Total loss of about $250,000, $250,000. It was the largest fire in the U.S. in the Midwest at that point, until a year later you have the Chicago and Peshtigo fires. And the paper said it was curious to note that this area is surrounded by water, otherwise the entire city of La Crosse might have burned down. But everything there was consumed by fire. So, back to the legend. I hear the ringing of the bell. The Galena was destroyed by fire July 1st, and everybody said, oh, the War Eagle, the same time. Well, not exactly, but there were 5 casualties on the Galena, 3 women and 2 men. The fire was on the starboard side, the chimney, the roof, and Red Wing is on the west bank. The War Eagle was destroyed by fire May 15th, so not the same time. It was about the same hour. It was midnight, 1 o'clock. The War Eagle had 5 casualties, 2 women and 3 men. The fire was on the port side of the main deck. So starboard side of the roof, port side of the main deck. And La Crosse is on the east bank of the Mississippi, of course. The Galena was 4 years old. The War Eagle was 4 times 4, or 16 years old. So there wasn't an exact comparison, but more like a mirror image. It's just undeniable stuff. And this is a picture that was done in 2018 by the Wisconsin Historical Society. This is the first time you will have to see the entire boat since 1870. There it is in the river, and the barge is actually underneath it. But it's all there, and we can measure the width of the hull, and that's the 200-foot length of the boat. So there it is, waiting to come up. There's still a lot of it down there. The newspaper said these staunch old boats have done their last work, and no longer will these familiar craft grace the shores of the Mississippi with their presence. But they will live on as long as we remember the Sisters of Steam. And so that's the end of our voyage. Yes?
After a disaster like this, did they ever clean up the river?
The War Eagle is still down there. The Galena wreckage, I think, was pulled out because it's kind of in a channel. The War Eagle was in the Black River, which is off channel. It's still down there. The dredge has cut into it a little bit, but it's all still down there. And we have a number of artifacts down in La Crosse that are brought up by divers, but there's a whole lot. There's 200 feet of boat down there. Glass, metal, pewter, crockery, iron things are still down there, and just waiting to come up.
We got a few minutes. Any other questions for Bob?
So Sisters of Steam, the Galena and the War Eagle, remember those? They were out here all season, 8 months of the season. And they did like to go up the St. Croix because it was deep water. I never could understand that until I realized the depth of the water. They would come up to Prescott and go up to Stillwater or Hudson before they went to St. Paul. This struck me as funny, but this was a pleasure to go in the deep water up here. But they were out here many times. And, so thanks for your attention.
What was the average fare from their run to the view up here? What did they
Average
charge?
fare?
Yeah.
I do know that. I haven't thought about that for a while. I think in the early 1850s it was $12 for first class passage with meals. Yes.
That time frame you're talking about, there were no locks and dams at that point in time, right?
No, just a wide open river.
The gunpowder was black?
Yeah. Yep. And it was typical for them to carry powder. There was a hatch in the bow of most boats that was storage down low for powder. The powder magazine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did they ever switch to coal?
They did switch to coal late on. They burned wood because there's lots of wood.
Yeah, the trees, yeah.
It was cheap. But a lot of times they would carry coal in a bunker for speed, or if they couldn't get any good wood, or if it was wet.
The St. Paul was a big coal drop-off.
Later, yeah. But it was expensive. Some of the comparison was that you could buy a cord of wood, a full cord, which is huge, for $5. And then you could buy a ton of coal for $5. And they didn't think that was worth it. But you know, it had to be brought in from Pennsylvania or somewhere.
Sure.
So, but later on, the boats went to coal because it would burn when it was wet. Yes.
I'm just, lock and dam number 2. Now, did they have to deal with rapids before the lock and things were, or how did they get through all that area?
Well, there were rapids down in Keokuk
Yeah.
and down that way. And of course, up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, there was a rapids thing. I haven't quite figured that out. We used to run that in high water, but that's been dammed off.
That was up around the Ford plant, wasn't it? It's locked and dammed.
That's
They
number
were that-
one.
That far up, yeah.
But there's another just spillway. There's no lock, it's just a spillway at Hennepin's Falls.
I was the last pilot to go above Minneapolis almost 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
We built the 610 bridge at Coon Rapids, at the Coon Rapids Dam. And now they've closed the lock up there, and they're going to basically turn it into an entertainment venue. They're going to make it back into parks and that. And where Bob was talking about, when they come down there, called Monkey Rider in high water, it's one hell of a ride. And it's still one hell of a ride.
The captain of the War Eagle made that run on the Fannie Harris. And they had a rapids pilot who's supposed to know what he's doing. And he hit some rocks and it tore off part of the monkey rudder. And the rapids pilot said, "She's gone," and he ran out of the pilot house. Well, Tom Cushing, the regular pilot, and his assistant, George Merrick, grabbed the wheel, and Cushing told Merrick what to do, and they steered that boat for 6 miles through the rapids. They're going full speed, which gave them some navigational control until they got down below St. Paul and they beached it, and they threw the rapids pilot overboard. So those were wild days.